All right, I'm Danny Grizzle. You may not know me, but if you don't, that's good. The Lindsey family is enormous, sprawling, and all over, I guess, the four corners of the earth at this point. But today is Saturday. What is today? Saturday, June the 27th, 2020. And we were supposed to be doing the Lindsey reunion today, and of course it had to be canceled because of the circumstances out with the pandemic and all. We had a brief discussion about maybe doing some kind of a Zoom session or anything, but that's just a little too tech. But we had such big plans, and the family was going to really come on and try to really produce a spectacular reunion this year. But that didn't happen, and it's not to be. Let me mute my phone while I'm doing this. At any rate, I'm going to go ahead and just in honor of the reunion and put something on the James Monroe and Mary Sarah Ann Lindsey Family Facebook page. I had intended to live stream this. I thought, wow, I can go to the office in the morning and surely I can be ready in an hour and knock this out before noon, and I've got two lawns to mow, and here it is, sunset. It's getting dark outside, and I'm still not able. I haven't gone to mow, and I don't expect. I had to give up on live streaming. We did we jumped through a lot of hoops to try to live stream this so that we could do some interactive in the chat and that sort of thing. But that's just not to be. You can't activate live streaming to a Facebook group like this one on the spur of the moment. You have to go through an approvals process, and that would be days down the line. And so this is at this point where I just had to do it and upload it as a regular movie later this evening, or abandon the project altogether. I do have some things like this is the Facebook group. If you're seeing this video, it's because you're a member of this group. And Bill Grubbs issued a challenge to me a few days ago to do something with the pictures and all that I've done over recent years. So that's what I'm going to do. I don't know exactly where this is going to go, but I do think that it's going to be fairly lengthy. I think I'm going to have three things. We're going to take a quick look at where James Monroe and James and Sarah lived in Helena, Alabama, which is near Birmingham. That's these places, they're real to me now because thanks to Bill Grubbs, I've visited the place, and we're going to see some of that in a little bit. But I know that before I set foot there, it's all this mythical land, and your imagination takes over. So let's see what we got here. I'm going to switch. I'm winging this. I didn't do any preparations, just so everybody knows. Anything that I might say is going to be full of errors and totally recollection. I didn't prepare this. I just decided I was going to get up this morning and do something. So I thought it would be brief. I thought I had given a version of this talk before at a family reunion in Utah. So here's our webpage. But let's see where this couple, James Monroe on the right and Sarah, actually lived. And this is the James Monroe Lindsey family reunion that we're having today. Although most of us are in closer touch with their various children at this point, because James Monroe, just to put this in context, he was a Civil War veteran, and so that's been a good while ago now. So let's look at Google Earth here, and seeing the whole United States, all of North America, just about there. And let me see if I do my mouse correctly. We'll just zoom in. Oh, and I'll get surprises because, as I say, this is live. It's not rehearsed. It's not unedited. It's just going to go up for whatever it is. Now, the family has mainly been is living in, like I said, the four corners of the earth, really. But our history involves Alabama and Texas and places like that, and I will go into a lot of that here in a little bit. But let's just slide over here to where we can see Alabama. Let me see if I can straighten that up. I am just trying to operate the computer. All right, that's not the best, but we're gonna go with it. And if we zoom into the middle part of Alabama, the thing that you need to know about where the Lindseys come from there, and this wasn't where James Monroe was actually born, but most of the family that we, those of us in East Texas, are descended from in the families that have been, of their children that have been most active in the family reunion are William Jasper Lindsey, John Thomas Lindsey. Both of those men are buried at the Kelsey Cemetery in East Texas. But as we're going to see in this presentation, their baby brother, Sylvester Lindsey, never left Alabama. And so some of these place names here, let me see if I've got this right. I still don't know what I'm doing. I think that's the city of Birmingham. If you can see me highlight it there on the screen, it's going to be, if you're watching this on a cell phone, that's going to be pretty hopeless. But just to tell you what part of the country this is, because a lot of us haven't traveled to Alabama a great deal, is there's two great mountain ranges in the United States, which are the the Great Smoky Mountains, or the Appalachia chain that runs from the state of Maine all the way down the eastern seaboard through, it's the boundary between North Carolina and Tennessee, the eastern boundary over there by those cities like Chattanooga and all that. But then at the end of the chain, it hooks down to the west a little bit and goes into central Alabama, is the terminus of the Appalachian Mountains. And so Birmingham is right there on the north side of that, and the river that drains those southern mountains is called the Cahaba. And James Monroe Lindsey's home place, where he had land, is below Shades Mountain, which is regarded as the last mountain in the Appalachian chain. In fact, we have family stories that he tried to operate a grist mill, but maybe we're told that there was not enough headwater there to power grinding stones and such. So that is the city of Birmingham right there. And then if we were to get a little closer here, Bessemer, Alabama, these places. But right here, just south of town, and actually Helena, Alabama is older than Birmingham's, actually a quite new city. But Birmingham, we have the city right in this Google Earth view. We see the Cahaba River snaking through here, and the Cahaba is a beautiful river. It's a mountain river. The waters run clear. So it's not like our muddy East Texas rivers or anything. And this blue line that you see on this map, I set a GPS tracker on myself and Bill Grubbs. Bill Grubbs invited me along, and he had a dream of camping on the Cahaba River at the home place of James Monroe Lindsey there on the land. And I'll tell you about that. You can see fairly clearly in this. I'll put it right in the center of the screen. That's an airport. That airport was actually built on the eminent domain land from Sylvester Lindsey. And over here on this left group of pins here, there's a real estate development named Lindsey Acres. Bobby Lindsey, who is a grandson of Sylvester, who is deceased. But these are all people that the Grubbs family kept in touch with for over the years. And so Bill knows these folks, and there is the road that they live on here, this blue road, was built by Sylvester Lindsey, and it's called Lindsey Loop Road. So that's where we stayed. This land on the airport was eminent domain out of Sylvester's land. People in this part of the country, their occupations were timber, coal mining, and steel. That's the reason you have Birmingham, and if you've ever driven through that part of the country, it is steel-producing country, and it's named with names like Bessemer, Alabama, and so forth, that would be associated with steel-producing communities in England. So some of those place names carried across. But it's a short drive, maybe 30 minutes or so, out through this area that Bill and we get into Helena. And Helena, the little community of Helena, and we're going to see more about it in a little bit, but the little community of Helena on the south side of the river, or the southeast side of the river from Birmingham, this is where James Monroe Lindsey's mailing address was. So if I can't get my mouse correct. So this is this is downtown Helena over this way. That's maybe their municipal, this is the downtown. This is a cemetery. I've got a pin set placed right there. We're going to see Bill Grubbs and local men showing, standing at that very spot in a little bit. Nice. The city hall's over here, and anyway, it's a nice suburb type community of Birmingham today. And then you can see Bill and I. This is the Walmart Supercenter right here. And Bill and I driving loops around there, buying camping supplies and putting gas in the vehicle and all that sort of thing. But this road out from the west, that is basically the main street of Helena, Alabama, it crosses the highway there. And you're going to go here in just a minute. We're going to see a time lapse, and it goes out here past the edge of town, and it becomes a gravel road. And this area where James Monroe used to live, his home place, where all the Lindseys come from, we've got the GPS coordinates. It's clearly marked now and all that. Let me see. I might zoom in too far. Sorry, folks, I cannot get this. There's different accesses, but this land out here, after James Monroe left, this land became ultimately, as today, it's owned by the United States Steel Corporation because of their coal mining activities and steel production, and they acquired a lot of land there, and our family's pretty much long gone out of that country. And so this is United States Steel put this land in the National Wildlife Refuge System for their tax purposes. So right here we see a path. This is way off road. This land is not accessible. You'll see that in a minute. There's two pins here, and there is if I can zoom in right. This big oxbow in the Cahaba River right here. The river is flowing from the top and right side of the screen, and it flows around this big oxbow upside down for us, like a letter U. The river loops around. Well, the land on the south side of that river was James Monroe's homestead. And prior to the Civil War, he built the piece on the western side, that pin right there, the cabin site number 1. He built a cabin there before the Civil War. And likely that's where my great-grandfather, William Jasper Lindsey, was born there within the first year or so of the Civil War. And then after James Monroe came home from the Civil War, he built a much bigger home on the east side of his property on the other side, and you would be very close, but I'm going to tell you, this land is so heavily wooded that you have no idea that you can only see this proximity to these two places in the satellite view. In reality, you've got to have these roads are old and not maintained by anybody anymore. And so they're pretty much impassable. You'll see the vehicle that Bill Grubbs and I used to get down in there, but this is I think I made a note right there. There is like an oil field. This is sort of like in those of us in East Texas will relate to this because it's like oil field. But they maintain the graded roads into the National Wildlife Refuge just far enough for their purposes. But that point right there is where we had to stop basically at the edge of an oil pad site to unload. We were able to pull a trailer in with a four-wheel drive ATV vehicle that we had to follow all these other roads to these home sites. Now, these home sites are not easily located. So I treasure these pins because they were, we'll get into this a little bit, but these home sites had to be, I think our grandparents, my grandmother, by the way, is Connie Lindsey Denton. And I think that older generation of the Lindsey family, there was evidence of these homes, these log homes out in the woods were still standing 70 or 80 years ago. And I know that Tony Denton has a stone that was once the doorstop, I believe, of that second cabin. So there was some souvenir taking over the years, but there is no evidence whatsoever of where those homes once stood. They've totally rotted into the ground. It's a pretty interesting story because how they were located by people, this Bobby Lindsey, the grandson, or maybe the great-grandson of Sylvester Lindsey, who from living memory when he was a child, his dad had taken him out there. And then so he remembered where it was, but they had to be probed and located. There's no evidence of them left today. Except for if you know where to dig, because what happens is the old stone chimneys collapse, they fall. You have leaf accumulation under the forest, that plant matter decay, and pretty soon they're just lumps of soil. So Bill Grubbs was able to go in there and probe with a shovel and locate the cornerstones of the cabins, but he knew where to look. Okay, enough Google Earth. I'm going to zoom out. And to say this story gets pretty interesting, and even more interesting with the life of William Jasper Lindsey. I'm not familiar with John Thomas Lindsey's story. I actually know more about Sylvester Lindsey's history than I do about John Thomas, who came to Texas and settled in the Kelsey and Enoch community. But I'm going to get out of Google Earth here, and what are we going to do? I just wanted to get us oriented. But this story, before we're through tonight, this story is going to be much bigger than Central Alabama, and it's going to involve Milam County, Texas, down near College Station. It's going to involve Kelsey, and it's going to involve three places out west. So let me see what I got here. I mean, this is unrehearsed, unplanned. We're doing this on the spur of the moment. Let's see what I've got in this folder to look at. Okay, that comes up in the slides in a minute. That comes up. This is Idaho. This is country that they went to. This is over... I'm jumping around stories. I'm on. This would involve the son of James Monroe Lindsey, William Jasper, lived out in western Idaho, one of the three places. So this is western Idaho, a country called Payette. Now today there's a community there called Payette, but when you get on the ground over there, you understand that the entire western edge of Idaho, past Boise, west of Boise, up against the Oregon border, that was all called Payette. I was driving through there. I thought that was pretty interesting to see a Lindsey, somebody putting their sign by the highway. I remember it was on a Sunday when we drove by there, and I actually turned up that lane and located that house. Nobody was home, and I didn't want to be poking around anybody's place, but there was a long shot anyway. I'll tell these stories later. Let's go into my slideshow because to keep from just doing too many things. I'm going to hit the play button here. Man, you're watching this live, folks. So this little presentation I put together for the one of the family reunions held in recent years in Utah, and then also a year ago at the Lindsey reunion here in Texas, which was attended by like 3 people. So why not throw it up on Facebook tonight? We've already talked too much about Helena, Alabama, but we're going to talk some more about it because this is. But here I am. Let me switch back to me. Here I am sitting here in my BYU shirt. So I understand that all descendants of the Lindseys are not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Of course, Brigham Young University is the church's school in Provo, Utah. Just as well, I understand that everybody's not members of the church, just like those of you who are not members of the church realize how significant the church is in the history of our family. So I wanted to go into a little bit to explain to you how that happened. And how that happened, if we were to look at James Monroe Lindsey, it happened because of James Monroe Lindsey's young baby brother. I don't know if he was the baby of the family, but this young man here on the left of this slide, Noah Lindsey. And he was also, that's a great picture. When you come across these great pictures, when you've worked on family history for a little while and you see a great photograph like this, it tells you something. And what it tells us about Noah, these were not wealthy people, and having a photograph made was something that was done at considerable expense at the time. But what this tells us was that Noah was going into the Civil War, and he wanted his mother to have this picture in case he never came home. And that was a real concern for him. So I was going to talk maybe too long about this picture and about Noah. And even though our family organization is the James Monroe Lindsey family and all the descendants of James Monroe, Noah Lindsey, James's brother, could just not be more significant in the family history. Not long after this picture was made, Noah was in the military. He became a prisoner of war. He was captured by Sherman's forces as they marched to the sea, and Noah became a prisoner of war of the Union Army. And so because of that, and because they keep very good records of prisoner of war camps and his various transfers, he was transferred several different places. And Noah ultimately wound up in the Chicago POW camp. Now, I'm a big fan of Ken Burns. And let me punch something up here. I'm going to put my picture up here so that you guys can see me talking on these slides. But I'm a big fan of Ken Burns. And when Ken Burns did his documentary series on the Civil War, he did an entire episode on the prisoner of war camp in Chicago. He began that episode, by talking about the notorious Confederate prisoner of war camp at Andersonville, Georgia. And Andersonville, circumstances few of us in today's world can imagine. But the commander of Andersonville was the only military person, the only military officer in the Civil War who was prosecuted for war crimes, and he was executed for the mistreatment of prisoners at Andersonville. Ken Burns opened his documentary about the Chicago prisoner of war camp by saying it was equally bad as Andersonville, but of course the victor doesn't prosecute their own officers. In his episode, Ken Burns had some very graphic details about the Chicago prisoner of war, where Noah Lindsey found himself late in the war. Of course, by the time Sherman marched to the sea and burned Atlanta and all those things that we've seen in the movie Gone with the Wind, the war was nearing its conclusion. And but Ken Burns was very graphic in detailing how much urine the human body produces, how many men were on how many acres, the mortality rate. And what happened with Noah Lindsey, the commander of the Chicago POW camp, he called this teeming mass of men inside this stockade. He called them all together in September, or at the onset of autumn, and he gave them a speech. He says, boys, he says, we're going to let you write letters home to your mothers, because if things go how they did last year, come spring, 80-90% of you will be dead, because they were all lice infested with just shabby blankets. They were barefooted, and they knew all about the Chicago winter coming on at that point. So Noah heard this speech, and the only way out, and he took it, was to renounce the Confederacy. They made a point the war was really over by then. It was only a matter of time. It was the last minutes of the Civil War, and join the Union Army. However, if they were not expected to fight against the Confederacy or against their own kinfolk or whatever, so these guys, and Noah among them, were immediately segued, because the Civil War immediately segued into the Wild West and everything we know. So Noah, this young man at the left here, found himself driving supply wagons behind teams and supplying forts. The Western fort system was already underway, like Fort Laramie and in all points west, out on the western frontier, and the Indian Wars were getting going and all that. I mean, it was there was no peace in that era. And so Noah, as he's out there, he ultimately he made contact all the way. I guess we had to. He went over the Continental Divide. He was driving. He was a teamster driving supply wagons, and he came into contact with the Latter-day Saint population that was established in the vicinity of Ammon, Idaho, but what's today that southeast corner of Idaho, which is on the west side of the Grand Teton Mountains, so just over the mountain range from Jackson Hole and those areas of far west Montana. So over the Continental Divide, and he came into contact with that population. And there he met a young woman named Josephine Bergamine Kofed. And they fell in love, and Noah was her family. Josephine had come from she was Danish or something, Kofed, and so she was an immigrant, as were her parents, and they were just barely established. And so when Noah and Josephine decided to get married, he joined the church. And he seriously joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so they were ultimately, Noah and Josephine were ultimately wed in the endowment house in Salt Lake City, because there were no temples in southeastern Idaho at that time. And the endowment house was where ordinance work, such as marriages, were performed in Salt Lake City before the completion of the historic Salt Lake Temple. So even early on, although I think that temple took like 80 years to complete. So it was not like Brigham Young was still there. I don't know the exact timeline. Like I say, do your own fact checking of anything I say, but I know that basic fact is true, that Noah wed Josephine in the endowment house in Salt Lake City before the Salt Lake Temple was finished. And I'm actually looking at a monitor over this way, but so that's how that came about. And then Noah took to writing letters to the LDS general authorities in Salt Lake, asking them to send missionaries to his people in Alabama. And simultaneously, he began writing letters to his family in Alabama, asking them to receive these missionaries. Now, let me see how far I am into this already. I set a stopwatch running. I'm already a half an hour. This could go way long. So this is where, by that time, as we said, James Monroe Lindsey was home from the Civil War. He had built that second house, his second homestead, on the eastern side, east of the original one on the west, on his original land grant. And his mailing address was in this little tiny town called Helena, Alabama itself, which is very near the Cahaba River. And these missionaries that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints sent into the South, that was pretty extraordinary. That was very extraordinary, and I've often observed that the missionaries that we all know the stories of how the Mormons were driven out of the Illinois and all points in the eastern United States, and they had to seek refuge in the West, in the mountains of the West, because of the persecution that they faced. And those same persecutions were a factor for these missionaries who ventured back into these areas of the South immediately following the Civil War. You have to let me take my picture off that so you can see that. LDS missionary persecution in Alabama following the Civil War. That's Main Street in Helena. We're going to see a modern picture maybe of that same view, that same road, where that white building is, and just to the left of center in the frame. That's the railroad. 2 railroads move through there today, and just out of frame in that old black and white picture is a Masonic Lodge, which figures prominently in Lindsey family history as well. So I'm going to read this bit here, but those missionaries were not welcome. Now, the Lindsey family has books in our family's possession that's been done over the decades by family genealogists. And we have a black Lindsey book and a red Lindsey book, and really there's a third tier of that now, is that the family history is now being kept online, like everybody's, at Ancestry.com, and you can contact Bill Grubbs for access to those records on Ancestry. I believe it's a public record, although you can't see names of living persons until anyway, there's rules about that. Living people are not, you can see, there's like, for instance, in my family, I have 2 brothers, and it would just say 3 male grandsons of Connie, my mother's Carol. Anyway, I'm going to read this. These elders found themselves in the South and not very welcome. Now, our Black Lindsey book has an account of the persecution of members of the church. But you have to understand the context of those times and what were going on. We've all heard the word carpetbagger, but I think very few of us have really stopped to consider what was really happening, the dynamic after the war. And we know that there was impeachment proceedings against Lincoln's vice president, Andrew Johnson, who became president upon Abraham Lincoln's assassination, because basically Andrew Johnson, along with Ulysses S. Grant and a lot of them, they were quite lenient on the South, which was Abraham Lincoln's list, wishes and his plan not to take punitive actions against the South. And so there were a lot of people. I mean, there's such tremendous loss of life on both sides. I mean, that war was incredibly brutal. So let me switch back to me, So there was such incredible loss of life at that time, and there were a lot of Northerners who were not satisfied that there wasn't a heavy toll extracted from the South. And so there were the carpetbagger era was really a way that people were appointed as overseers. No one who had served in the Confederate Army was allowed to hold any office whatsoever. No political offices, no civic offices, nothing, no law enforcement. So basically, and the people who were sit there from the North to be administrators, who became known as carpetbaggers, most people from the South regarded those people as lawless and basically legal looters of the South. They could take whatever they wanted. They could do anything they wanted with impunity. There was no recourse whatsoever. And the entire South was swept with a great deal of violence. And in the southern tier of states, there was every good war deserves another. That's a horrible expression, but their vigilanteism became prevalent in the South, all across the South. And vigilanteism, just like extra legal activities going on in our country right now, once you light the fuse to that kind of dynamite, it doesn't contain itself. It's excessive. And so these are the vigilante actions called themselves the regulators. They were going to regulate the lawlessness in the South because they couldn't depend on the administrators from the North. They were just there looting the place. So there were the regulators were regulating the lawlessness, and until the regulators became horribly excessive, and that became a situation of the regulators were murdering other Southerners, saying we wouldn't be in this predicament. That everybody thinks that the South was uniform, but if you look at the votes about the Confederacy, certainly here in Texas, not every county voted to leave the Union. There were Union counties, and there were and just like today, you can't go at any level of counties, among families or whatever. People had split opinions, and even various counties voted to stay in the Union. Among various families, that was a point of contention. And so when the regulator faction of vigilantes started not just performing police functions and so forth in the South, but they started taking revenge on people who they blamed for this great calamity that had befallen them, that their entire way of life was lost, that their everything that they knew was lost, and it just was an incredibly violent time. I've read a great deal of North Georgia history, and we won't go into all that now, but a lot of just and the murders could be over anything, old grievances that predated the war. Your grandfather did my grandfather wrong on a land deal. Your brother, or they would kill somebody that had looked at their sister wrong 20 years before. Anything would justify a murder, and they could just do it with impunity. So when vigilanteism gets started and this extra legal violence, then there's a response, and to the regulators were the other faction in that vigilante period that lasted years and years, were called the moderators. regulators and moderators. So you can watch any of this thing that is curious that I need to get off this because I'm talking too long. We've been going 10 minutes on this. But the greatest violence of all in the regulator-moderator conflicts actually occurred in East Texas, right here under our feet next to the Louisiana border. I could call the county names, but it wouldn't really matter because the counties have been split and divided. Gregg County didn't even exist before the Civil War. Upshur County did. Harrison County specifically was the greatest bloodshed. But today, if you look into the regulator-moderator conflicts, and the most famous of those battles were in Lincoln County, New Mexico, and all the Billy the Kid movies. Billy the Kid, that was part of that regulator-moderator thing. But the Lindseys got caught up in this as well. And because of this severe violence, a lot of people in the South following the Civil War just wanted to throw in the towel, leave their land, leave their home, go west, get in new country, get away from this. So, as unpopular as anybody can be, now let's think for a second what it would be like for the Lindsey family to receive, I know we're not supposed to say Mormons, but that's what they were called at the time, and to receive Mormon missionaries and harbor those missionaries, because very clearly the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was a church that was associated with the North. It was a Northerner religion. It was clearly sided with the North. It had clearly condemned all the causes that the South is slavery. The church was opposed to slavery very clearly, and so here we have Mormon missionaries, this northern church, right in the middle of all this violent period, because of Noah Lindsey sent to his brother's home, James Monroe, on the banks of the Cahaba River. And there was great conflict, and that conflict is clearly recorded in the Lindsey book. We get one side of the story, maybe, of people who had joined the church. And these are people who, at that point, would have been, what is the phrase? Persona non grata. These are people who were joining the church. And so that's the story that we see in our Black Lindsey book. However, we don't hear the other side of the story and I know the other side of that story now, as unfair and as unreasonable. And I mean, I don't agree with it, but I know it. And you're going to meet here in just a moment. But let me read a newspaper story of how things were as James Monroe Lindsey, this is before anybody left. This is the circumstances in Alabama. The Calera, Alabama Correspondent. Headline, Mormon Elders. Let me punch this up. It'll be on the right side of the screen. Mormon elders tarred and feathered. The Calera, Alabama Correspondent of the Chicago Times, writing on the 17th, says, for the past 3 months, 6 Mormon elders have been proselyting in this section. It doesn't identify James Monroe Lindsey, but he was their protector. They were staying at his place on the Cahaba. And also at several, these 6 Mormon elders were also at several small towns across the Georgia border. Several converts were made at the latter places, and the indignation and wrath of the people could hardly be suppressed when, on last Sunday, 4 married women and 2 men left their homes and made public their intention of going to Utah. For all we know, that was William Jasper Lindsey. The people then gave the elders notice to move on instantly. They refused at first, but on Monday night, 2 of them were taken out and tarred and feathered, and the next night, 2 others were chased into the woods by hounds and kept in the trees all night. The elders left the next day, and the converts are now missing also, leaving 6 forsaken homes. If the elders ever return, they will be shot on sight. The Mormons began their work in the lower part of this county among the ignorant country people. I guess we can assume that the Lindseys are those ignorant country people because we were the ones responsible for it. They were successful there and baptized a dozen or more. On Tuesday, while elders Maurer and C were conducting a meeting at a log schoolhouse, 50 armed men dragged them from the pulpit. They were carried into the woods, the mob threatening to hang them at every step. But on the intercession of friends, they were released on their written promise to leave the country in 24 hours. Death was the alternative if they returned. Both left that night, but without their converts, escorted a portion of the way by an armed band of nearly 100 men. Armed patrols are on guard and publicly announce their intention of killing the first elder who returns there. Now, the Lindseys aren't named in this newspaper piece there from the community. This was the paper circulating there. But we know that it was the family, and we know from the family's written records that are preserved in the Black Lindsey book. These stories are there as well. I'm not going to go into all those details because the details don't agree. And, of course, my inclination is certainly to trust the personal records that the family has because who knows? This may be fake news in this article. People... and the partisan interpretation and reporting of things we are well acquainted with today. Let me see what my next slide is. We're going to meet in this next slide here. We're going to meet in the city of Helena today, the Masonic Lodge. One thing about the Lindsey book, if you do read that Lindsey book, you're going to find that certain things in those accounts recording in the Lindsey book are sanitized. The names of the people who were leading these mobs were known 70 or 80 years ago. There were people who, in living memory, knew who the parties were in these conflicts and persecution between the locals and the Mormons, the people who are joining the church, the Lindsey family, and others. And this is a much more complicated story than I can really get into today. And I personally think that the story of Parley Pratt is intertwined into what incited mob violence in the South, as if joining the Northern Church and renouncing the Confederacy and denouncing slavery and everything that came with joining the church, as if that were not enough to make the Lindseys fear for their lives in that violent era of the regulator and moderator. But the stories in the Lindsey book are sanitized because the names of the adversaries there were omitted, though they were known, but they were omitted from the original Lindsey book because it was still a tender or it wasn't. But what I'm saying is we know the names of those people today. I don't know if I'll get into all that. I can't recall their names, but to cut to the chase of the story, James and Sarah Lindsey, some of those people leading the mobs were Sarah's brothers, who were ministers and preachers of churches in Helena. So that tells you why the family would have been concerned to strike those records and not antagonize, because they're still family. So today in Helena, Alabama, we're going to hear another side of the story and what was used to whip up the mobs and what maybe came through not just the religion guys of the time, but also, let me see, I'm off camera and again, I don't want to show you all a black screen all night, but not just the religious orders, but the Masonic Lodge was also heavily involved in networking. I mean, not as an official capacity, but just by a network of people who talked and who information spread among on the frontier in that lawless time when there weren't even newspapers hardly. And so anyway, we're about to hear another part of that story. It was unbelievably hard times. And so there is a museum in Helena today, and you're going to see an interview with the man it's named after. It's called the Ken Penhale Museum, and you're about to meet Mr. Penhale. He is a wonderful man, and he's an amazing man. I believe he knows more about Lindsey genealogy than the vast majority of descendants of the Lindseys, because he studied it, and it's just been a case study for him because Sylvester Lindsey, James Monroe's youngest brother, remained. He married into people of prominence, and so they donated. They were big benefactors of the Ken Penhale Museum. So the entire wall that you're about to see when we meet Mr. Penhale in the next minute or so, that entire wall is actually dedicated to the Lindsey family, and it's all people that were related to. And you'll also see behind him a spinning wheel which belonged to Sarah Lindsey, and it was old when she was there in the Civil War. It was at those home sites on the Cahaba River, and the spinning wheel, Mr. Penhale told me, predates the American Revolution, and it had been handed down from mother to daughter until it was in the hands of Sarah Lindsey's hands. And the crux, you'll hear from Mr. Penhale here, but these are things that were passed down to him from his father and his grandfather, these stories, and he is into all things involving history. In fact, he studied the Black Lindsey book very carefully, and there's certain things that are presented, recollections. All things are remembered in the memory of the person who holds those memories. But you can have two people go through the same experience and take away totally different things. If you're uncomfortable with, if you're the kind of person who wants to tie things up into a neat bedtime story and those kind of whimsical tales, and it just smudges the past. But when you understand, it blurs the past. It's not revealing. And when you understand the complexity, we all think, oh, the past were simpler times, and we do live in complex times ourselves right now. But you have to understand that these James Monroe and these people in the South and this people involved in this regulator-moderator conflict, those weren't guys flying drones and dropping bombs, going to work and dropping bombs in Afghanistan. These are men who had fought these battles, these horrific battles of the Civil War, and you got to understand, these are people who they knew nothing about antibiotics or modern medicine. Doctors didn't even wash their hands. And thought it was ridiculous to suggest that a doctor needed to wash his hands, and sawed off people's. They had faced horrific circumstances. So we're about to hear the tradition, another side of this story, which involves all the rumors and innuendos about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which includes polygamy, and these men were afraid that these Mormon elders, and this ties into Parley Pratt's complex story, that these Mormons were wanting their wives to leave them, to leave their children, and to marry into polygamous relationships. And of course, who knows how horrible women's lives were. They could have been looking for an escape. And so no doubt there were women who left and decided to head west to a new life away from an intolerable situation, whatever intolerable situation they were in. So I've talked too long about this, but you get the idea where this is going, and we're going to hear a different side of the story. And we can't be the judge of these things, just like we can't be a judge of a lot of things.
I've got a newspaper on it. It was in one of those albums. They was tarred and feathered them because they were coming in here and preaching and then leaving with the men's wives. But that was the bone of contention, I think. More than anything, they were just absconding with the women. But there's an article in there about it, clearly down here, about them tarring and feathering some of them. You know, James and some of the Lindsey writings, he talks about them, you know, mobs coming to the, I'm not, I did that, I don't know. But anyway, about mobs coming to the farm down there. But they weren't welcome. That was, and what I can assume is that was one of the big contentions. They were coming in and leaving with the women.
All right, so I've kind of covered some of this, but you know, as time goes on, various times, this is an article that appeared in the Shelby. This was I copied this from the Helena Museum, the Shelby County Register, March 6th, 2013. You know, just people there in central Alabama taking interest in our family. I'm going to read the captions picture. This family portrait of Sylvester Lindsey family shows back from left Sterling, Clarence, Lathan, and front from left Minnie, Sylvester, John, who's that boy in the middle called Buster, I guess, George, and Martha Lindsey. Lindsey Parsonage of Jasper for making their thanks to the Penn Hill Museum thanks Bobby and Brenda Lindsey and George, Martha Lindsey Partridge of Jasper for making their family history documents and photographs. This is I guess on the occasion of them donating things to the museum. But here we have our Civil War veteran James Monroe Lindsey and various of his sons. There, I don't believe William Jasper is visible in any of these. There he is in his horse and buggy. Even after James Monroe, in his old age, eventually followed his children to Texas because the Lindseys pretty much cleared out of Alabama, except for Sylvester. But James Monroe and Sarah came west in Milam County. William Jasper, their son William Jasper, was in Milam County at that time, and that's where Sarah died. She's our great-grandmother there on the left. Sarah died in Milam County, and she's buried in the Little River Baptist Church Cemetery. And James Monroe on the right spent his final years in the home of William Jasper Lindsey in the Kelsey community or thereabouts in Upshur County, for sure. And when he passed, one of his daughters, one of William Jasper's sister, he had a sister named Roxy who married into the Houston family while they were in Milam County. You know, there had been, I'm mixing stories together, but the James Monroe and Sarah had grown children who were in Milam County, and that's how the Chevalier name came into the Kelsey community because of daughters. Some of the older daughters married while they're in Milam County, and they wound up in the Kelsey community. And so a lot of the prominent names of the Kelsey community are out of Milam County as the girls married. And James Monroe here wound up passing away in the home of his son William Jasper in Upshur County. William Jasper took his father's body to the railroad station in Gilmer, and they crated him up in a casket or whatever, and shipped his body by rail to William Jasper's sister, Roxy, who had married a man named Houston. So we do have family in Milam County today named Houston. Wouldn't it be wonderful? We've talked about doing like doing a charter bus and going down and actually getting some of those people have them expecting us at some point. Maybe when this pandemic and everything's all over and we can go socialize, wouldn't it be great to go down there and meet them and have them tell us about their side, because they're James Monroe's descendants just as we are. That story of Milam County is quite complex and a lot of extended Lindsey, so I'm not even going to get into that. But I will go back to here we're back in Helena, Alabama. That is the Masonic Lodge that is now the Ken Penhall Museum, Helena Museum. That's a coal mining cart, haul ore out of the coal mines there in front of an outdoor exhibit. Just a sign. I'm just going to run through my pictures right quick. No, I guess this is February 27th, 2013. Museum acquires the Lindsey family history. And this is James Monroe's son, Sylvester, who married into the community there and stayed in Alabama. And his grandson, ultimately, we all looked for a place to put our stuff, and he had some great historic records, and it's in the museum's collection today. This entire wall in the Helena Museum, and that's the spinning wheel that I told you about. So both pretty much everything there is Lindsey related. There's a close-up of the spinning wheel. It's kind of roped off, but I'm sure if you're a Lindsey descendant, Mr. Penhall will let you touch it. Here's Bill Grubbs and Ken Penhall. Ken Penhall's there in the white ball cap, and the man is such an incredible, rich, deep source of information that when you walk the city cemetery there in Helena with Mr. Penhall, he not only knows the relationships of who descended from who, and he can recite Lindsey genealogy unbelievably, but he also knew who the cousins were and who the friends were, and unusual relationships of all these people in cemeteries. I mean, it's just hard for us to hang on to anything, but Mr. Penhall has made such a study of these things. He's really amazing. He's written a couple of books about Helena. And he usually, I think both of these books, these particular books were done on the occasion of some kind of a centennial or some kind of a deal. He apologizes for them, but he got it done. And I'm sure he knows better. And like all of us, I know all my failings in doing this live stream today and putting it out there anyway. Hey, I'm an hour into this. I've got my stopwatch running. I'm just going to jump right through my slides now and try to get some ground covered. Locating the James Monroe Lindsey second home site on the Cahaba River. Now, this is back in the day. This is an older picture before the trip. I made a subsequent trip with Bill Grubbs, but Bill Grubbs is marking the location of this home with his GPS. Now, some of the men who went with him that day are either deceased or quite elderly now. And so maybe the one, Bobby Lindsey, who remembered this from living memory, from visiting the site with his grandfather, I guess. This land had been sold by James Monroe, and Sylvester, the younger son, married into money with his family. And Sylvester actually went and tried to buy back this home place where he had been raised. But by then it was owned by U.S. Steel or their precursor or whoever, and they didn't want to sell, and they wouldn't sell. So Sylvester went across the river and bought the land, and he would go out there and just look from across the river in his old age. He had a place set up across the river so he could sit there on the porch or whatever and look at his childhood home that he could no longer set foot on, basically. Anyway, I've got another. And by the way, I cannot hear the audio. So I don't actually remember what Mr. Penhall says here, but I'm going to let him say it.
Whose great-grandmother was a little. She was Sarah Lindsey's sister, and Bobby Lindsey, which I'm sure y'all remember. The three of us went down there several years ago to the home place. Found, found both home sites. And I don't remember the exact year, but it was several years before we went then. But of course, I developed an interest in the family, and all that area, has been an important part of, the growth of Helena. So the day that we went with Bill, there was Tracy and Philip, her husband, and Charles and I, and Charles' son, and Bill, I want to say Bill's mother, and there's another couple that I don't remember. But we spent a big part of the day there on exploring both of the sites, which I was, interested in going back. It's sort of, the Lindsey history is sort of fascinating, the way things, the turn of events, the family coming and leaving and so forth. And of course, Sarah's parents, her family stayed here, and her parents are buried here in Helena, and her sisters and so forth, and brother. So, just really interested in being, learning about it and being such a, important part of Helena.
I am sorry. I'm sitting here, I had my mic turned off, and I knew better than that. Let me just recap what I just said. What did I just say? That the river where the Lindsey home site is very inaccessible. And so I believe that's what Mr. Penhale just talked about. I can't hear the audio, and I needed to take care of something. This is being recorded live, and I'm not gonna be able to take time to edit this. I'm just going to throw it out there, and sorry for that moment of silence. But anyway, I believe Bill Grubbs wanted to camp at the Lindsey home site. That's not accessible. That's not possible. You can't just show up down there. It's in a National Wildlife Refuge. It's behind lock key. It's not. They don't allow public access. But a series of very fortunate events allowed Bill and I to have permission and keys to get in and access the home site, and we were able to spend the night there. And the night that we did sleep there at the side of the house, I think this is the next video that's about to be here. Let me see. Yes. This is from Helena, the parking lot of the Helena Walmart. These are all those lines, if you remember from the beginning of this bit, me showing Google Earth. This is some of that driving, and Helena is over to the right. Mr. Penhale's museum's just like a mile and a half to the right. And this is one of those situations where the road changes names at the intersection. And today, this is all built out. And of course, back in the day when James Monroe, this would all been dirt roads. And I did a little speed video. We didn't really race through the edge of Helena, the western edge of Helena, this fast. But the reason I did this is to actually show how close the Lindsey home site to us today. It's nothing. But in the town at that time, this would have been a good ways out of town. Not like it was the other side of the county or anything like that. I do think this is silent. I didn't record any audio on this. Like I say, I cannot hear any sound that's playing with these videos the way I've got this set up. So, and I did mention that it's very much like oil field. This country looks, I mean, just identical to East Texas, except for maybe a little more hilly. You can tell that's an oil site right there. But you get down into the Lindsey home place, and those roads are not maintained at all. And in fact, they're probably never accessed much at all. I have a feeling that the only reason that those roads are still rutted and available is probably oil field workers eating their lunch, or I don't know that access is probably under the full supervision of the National Wildlife Refuge, but that is the Cahaba River. And today there is a pipeline right away, as you can clearly see here, that goes across the Cahaba, and that is on the edge of James Monroe Lindsey's second home place. I sure am glad Bill was driving. I was a little concerned he was getting into a place where the river had undercut and we were going to cave in and go in four-wheeler and all. But here's back at the road, Colmont Road. You can see the locked gate back there, and Bill and I probably drove past this spot 24 times before we happened to notice this sign, and I had to crawl up with the ticks and chiggers to actually get a good picture. But that Lindsey is not a coincidence. That's our great-grandfather. People there today have no idea why these things are named. There was a railroad crossing built downstream of the home place across the Cahaba, and that's also called Lindsey Crossing. And I'm sure none of the railroad people know why or anything. Now, there is, I do think that they have certain periods of the year where the land is accessible. So you just have to get on the Cahaba River's website to determine when that would be. There's wildlife management. I've already mentioned that this is owned by U.S. Steel, but it's really managed by the government now. And there's the river itself, right there below Shades Mountain. This is at the second Lindsey home site. The river is high, and the water was muddy because of the storm, and so it's that is not the normal character of the Cahaba River. That's after a pretty epic rainfall just before Bill and I arrived. The bank is actually quite steep there. It's hard to get down to the water, but from our understanding, that little cove right there, that might have been where the first baptisms occurred. And William Jasper, Sarah was baptized. William Jasper, yeah. Now that first home site on the Cahaba River, this is where Sarah and James Monroe lived before the Civil War. This is the place. This would have been the house where William Jasper Lindsey was born, out in the woods here. There's less living memory didn't serve too well to locate this. Mr. Penhale might have told some of this story in the video I couldn't hear, but the way that they determined this is because there's records, and they found these plants. And this is Bill Grubbs digging bulbs from the remnants of Sarah Ann Little Lindsey's herb garden at home site number 1, and there are 3 non-native species. There's garlic, and Bill knows the names of the plants specifically. I can't pronounce them all, but it's unmistakable. These plants do not occur in nature in the Cahaba, but there it is. Before the Civil War, these plants are still growing there under this forest canopy where that house once stood. Bill, some of it is daffodils. She had a little daffodil garden outside her house. So Bill is taking a shovel and even digging through anything that's a lump, or just trying to find any footing stones, the foundation, trying to locate anything. So we don't know. Some of these stones might have been, who knows, a chicken coop. We don't know. But these were stacked, and it was man-made, and you clear off the leaves and the dirt or whatever, and we just felt like this was part of their home place there, the improvements that they had made on that property, but they later abandoned to build a second home after the war. I think we're going to go into a second video here. So this is probably Danny Grizzle, Bill Grubbs. We're camped on the James Monroe Lindsey home site number 2, his second home site on the Cahaba River, and that's just about maybe 100 yards right behind us in the dark over there.
It's in front of us.
The Cahaba's right there.
Oh, the Cahaba. Yeah, I thought you meant the home site.
Yeah, the home site is about 100. It's 100 feet.
100 feet in front of us.
Just beyond us, and it's got trees grown up through it. And you located the 2 chimneys today and put a tape measure on it.
24 feet apart.
Yeah.
So I went back and looked. The rooms were 16 by 18. I'm not sure which side was 16. So there's 2 rooms, 16 by 18, with an 8-foot wide hallway in the middle.
An open, like a dog trot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A dog run.
Okay.
And I'm guessing if we looked, maybe 16 plus 16 plus 8, what is that? 40 feet?
16 and 16 would be what, 32?
And then 8's 40.
40, yeah.
So if we look at a 40-foot width, we should find the corner stones for that house. Although it probably wasn't a 40-foot log going end to end, there were probably center posts also that it rested on.
They sure weren't easy to find. I mean, it was just, there's so much debris on the forest floor out here, and there's, it just took a shovel in what looked like a mound. It was not apparent at all. So we're going to mark it with a GPS and to have some hope of having a real location on it, but it's not something that other people here camp at this site, and we see a lot of evidence of human activity down here, and nobody would ever have a clue that there had been a house here or anything.
Nope. Except Charlie Griffin.
Yeah.
He knew right where it was.
We met an old timer last night and interviewed him, and he has been crawling these woods his whole life and collecting. There's no way he's not one of the world's best arrow.
He's the arrowhead expert, that's for sure.
I mean, he had a museum quality gallery in his home. Everything in cases. Never saw anything like it in my life before.
He was telling me on the phone today that he had a guy come in there and interview him and wanted to do an article, and he actually wrote up an article and published it in a book with pictures of his gallery. And he says, and then he put it on Facebook, and he said, I didn't really want my gallery exposed to the world like that.
Yeah.
Because people might be interested in coming and helping themselves. But he said it was out there, and he did get a lot of calls. People wanting to come see it.
Well, I want to show a little bit of the stuff we shot over there. Most of it was the interview we shot with him, and he's old and feeble and neuropathy, and he can't hardly get around. He had 4 steps, a split level into that garage area where, he said that had just become torture to him. He just can't navigate his own house anymore, which is, the guy has led obviously a vigorous life, and
with lots of camping and lots of arrowhead digging.
lots out.
A lot of canoeing. He's canoed this whole Cahaba River, he said, from the top to the bottom, multiple times. Sometimes with his wife, who was very willing to go with him on his trips and camping out and tipping over the canoe and both getting wet. And he said she just was a good sport.
Charlie was going to loan us his canoe, but everybody here, they had some heavy rainfalls just a few days. Several storm fronts moved through, and that river is high, and everybody agrees that it's just too dangerous for us to be out on it.
Maybe tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow. Charlie's canoe is still waiting.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, we say there's hardly, no one would see any evidence of a home site here because, but they certainly would on the other. There's an oxbow that's behind us this way, and it took us at least 45 minutes to drive around the oxbow between the two James Monroe Lindsey home sites. And that home, the first home site, the evidence of that people are there is our grandmother's daffodil are still growing out under the trees there on the forest floor, and
Hundreds of them.
and you collected a bunch of those today.
I collected at least 100 today.
They're going to Utah.
Most of them are going to Utah, right? I'm going to plant a few at my parents' house in Longview there, and the rest of them I'm going to take home with me. And garlic. Garlic from the garden is growing wild. Well, not wild, but it's garlic that was left over from what they were growing. And Danny says, well, how do you know which is garlic and which is daffodils? And I said, you smell them, and you can tell right away that this is garlic. I can tell by the leaf, but you can definitely tell by the smell.
Yeah. And what was the third plant that was an herb that would...
Chinese quince was a shrub that was planted there, and it's still hanging on. And Charlie said those things will grow anywhere, and they're very hardy, and they bloom prolifically. We've already missed the bloom season on them.
But it's not a native species here, so the fact that we
Right.
found it over there is just a real strong indicator.
It was definitely a transplant from somewhere.
Well, I mean, we've got great historical records. I mean, there is definitive. We know that we're on the site of James Monroe Lindsey's homes because it's his land. And there's still living memory, and people who brought you down here the first time knew it. We're on the edge of the second home here, which is the eastern. We're on the south side of the Cahaba, and the eastern home site on the east side of the Oxbow is a pipeline right away, just 100 yards to the east of us here, and it's cleared, a clear cut channel on both sides. This area has been incredibly difficult to even, it's oil field and it's private land. Why don't you tell a story about, this is, the people around here kind of grieve that this land is not accessible, and your work last week, just pure fortunate that we were given permission and keys to be in here, and so...
Yeah, I was actually looking for a place we could rent a canoe, and there was one place on the river that I tried several times to contact, and he never returned my call. And so I branched out and called a guy at an organization called the Cahaba River Society, and got in touch with a guy there by the name of Randy. And he kind of discussed what we were trying to do, and he was interested in our objective. He even said he would love to come join us if he wasn't going to be out of town, but he didn't know that much about this part of the river, so he referred me to a guy at the wilderness management guy over, and I think this is a federal.
Yeah, the Cahaba River National Wildlife Refuge.
So it was a federal...
But it's private. It's a strange arrangement because this is private land too.
It's owned by Lone Star Steel, but they actually manage it.
Lone Star is Texas? No, it's...
Lone Star Steel. No. Not Lone Star.
We're in Alabama, Bill.
Yeah, it's not Lone Star. U.S. Steel.
U.S. Steel. Some of these people
it's
over
owned by U.S. Steel.
The Birmingham and the steel industry over here in Alabama.
It was owned before by a company by the name of TCI, which was a coal mining company. And, steel and coal kind of go hand in hand, and I guess U.S. Steel eventually bought out TCI, which included all this property. Anyway, so Randy gave me the phone number of the guy at the wildlife management area, or the Cahaba River Management, and he said Colonial Pipeline had the keys to all these gates, but they were headquartered out of Atlanta. But there's another company by the name of Saga, that was in charge of the pipeline, the transmission of the gas. And he called a guy over there and talked to him, told him what we were trying to do, and asked him if there was some way he would loan us a key to get through the gates. And the guy was, I guess because of his recommendation, he was willing to do that. And we met him early yesterday morning, and I mean, this guy was as big as you and me put together. And
As nice as he could be.
his hand was big as two of my hands. And anyway, he was very friendly and willing to let us have a key, and here we are as a result. Otherwise, we'd be out there at the gate.
Yeah. And even when you're past the gate, I mean, this was the place is it's oil field, and there are roads cut all through here, and we're beyond, down here at the river's edge, we're way beyond where they maintain the roads. And so we had to Tracy Lindsey Barnett. I keep wanting to say Burnett because that's how Burnett, Texas is
Tracy and
pronounced.
Philip Burnett.
And they were, if Philip hadn't loaned us his 4x4 or the ATV, his side-by-side four-wheeler, this spot is inaccessible. It's way beyond where the roads are. I mean, we've been crashing through mud holes that both of us are wet, and you're still in those rubber boots.
Right.
Not to mention that we both got stuck today and had to winch ourselves out of holes. Even with an ATV, it was rough getting in here. Anyhow, I guess that's enough of that kind of stuff. We aren't really to talk about because we're sitting here at the home site where James Monroe Lindsey, he was done here in 1901. So 116 years ago, he left for good. So what was the story? What was the story prior to that?
Well, the first home site, he purchased this property, 160 acres, in 1860. He'd married and had 2 children when he moved here to Shelby County, and I think it was a land grant that he was able to get this 160 acres. And right at that same time, William Jasper was born. We don't know if he was born in the cabin, that first cabin, or if they were living somewhere else at the time. But roughly in that same period of time that William Jasper was born. And
so how many children did he have before he lived there? And of course, we're most aware of William Jasper Lindsey because he's our great-grandfather.
He's ours, but
just to identify ourselves, you're Myrtle Lindsey Hamberlin's grandson, and I'm Connie Lindsey Denton's grandson.
And they are children of William Jasper.
Right. So that's who we've got on our mind mostly. but James
before
Monroe,
they moved here, he had 2 children, and they were John Thomas, which was his oldest child, and then I think the second was, I'm not sure. It was either Roxy Jane or Georgia Ann. I'd have to get the book out to see for sure. But anyway, William Jasper, I think, was the 3rd child, and he was born after they came here.
And we were discussing today, he was either born on the ground we were standing on over there, or that was his first home. He was an infant baby.
Right. So they built a 2-room cabin, log cabin, in 1860 on the other side of the river, the other side of the bend, up high up on a bluff overlooking the river. And they lived there until their 5th child was born, I think, in 1860, I'm going to say 3 or 4.
Yeah, we're camping. We don't have all the books with us.
Yeah,
so,
well, I actually do in my...
Yeah, well,
anyway, but
that'd make the video boring, but everybody needs to fact check
Right.
everything we say here to be exact tonight.
it's close.
It's a recollection.
And so the 5th child was born, and then a few months after that, he was called into service in the Civil War and left home. And he left his family here to fend for themselves while he took off to fight in the Civil War. And he was gone, I'd say 2 or 3 years. I'm not sure the total amount of time that he was involved, but he...
You know something? That was tough on the microphone right there.
All right. Sorry, I'm getting cold.
So let's go back to the he mustered in here. Do you know anything about that muster in process? I shouldn't spring just random questions on you, but they were living here at the onset of the Civil War, and James Monroe left the family with 5 children at that first home site where the daffodils are, which we missed photographing in bloom by a few weeks, and they're supposed to be absolutely fabulous.
According to Charlie, he said it is beautiful when they're all in bloom.
Yeah.
He's been there.
That's the earliest spring flower. And our grandmother just was here. How did she just was fending for herself down here. But there were, this area today is so vacant. Now we might hear some animals, and I'm hearing something calling, and during the daytime you might hear some oil field. There's a train track nearby on the other side of the river. Mm-hmm. The landmarks, there's a lot of landmarks down here in Shelby County, Alabama, with the Lindsey name. There's a Lindsey Loop Road. That's not actually in Shelby County, though, is it? What county is that over there?
I don't know.
It's Bessemer, the Bessemer area, which is on the other side of the river and just about a half an hour, would you say, from here?
Right.
If you don't hit their traffic. And but there's also, we drove in here, and the oil field people know this as Lindsey Road. They don't have any clue what the background, just like most of us where we live, we don't know what the story behind the names of the streets and the places in our own hometowns. But it's still called Lindsey Road, and the oil field workers that we ran into out here, they directed us in this general direction, but it is still so easy to get lost down here. We wasted a lot of time not only trying to find the sites, but trying to find our way back out of the sites again.
Lost.
We were lost. Lost and stuck in mud holes, and it's difficult. When you get down here, it's pretty nice. But this land is all private and quite inaccessible, and I'm saying the same thing again, but Charlie's just grieving that he can't run these hills like he used to, and part of that's he's old, and part of that's he just loves it out here. So
there's also this Lindsey Road is on Google Earth. If you were to go to Google Earth or Google Maps and look on here, you'll find Lindsey Road that comes right down here close to this property, and it comes off of Coalmont Road, which is the main road coming out of Helena.
Right.
So if you come out of Helena down Coalmont Road, come to Lindsey Road and turn right and wind your way around.
You'll know when you're getting out in the boonies when the pavement ends and you're about halfway out where this is.
Yeah.
But there is another Lindsey Road and landmark out here, which is they named the railroad bridge just downstream from here is called Lindsey Crossing. I think
Right.
Ken Penhell told us that yesterday.
I'd never known that.
We spent the day with the guy who runs the Helena Historical Museum, and the guy, utterly prolific knowledge about even the Lindsey people, who very few remain here. But he knows the entire family and the marriages and the...
He was amazing.
Amazing, yeah. Amazing. Everybody told us, I mean, leading up to meeting him, they says, Ken's a great guy. He's amazing, and he's amazing.
Yeah. You know, just upstream from where we are is Peel Creek, which is also significant to us. The Peel family was a neighbor to the Lindsey family, and they lived just up the Cahaba River, possibly a mile.
Did you say it was halfway back to town? It's not river
No.
miles. That thing winds all around.
No, I would say land miles, it's probably a mile. So,
Yeah.
you know, river miles, it may be a couple of miles, but it's really not that far up. But I think they were probably the closest neighbors to the Lindseys. Anyway, we'll talk more sometime about Peel Creek.
Yeah,
But it's also listed on Google Earth.
yeah. So, James Monroe, there's a lot of stories and more than we can go in. We need to talk about this site and the time he spent in the Civil War, but by the end, he was at, you said Appomattox. He was at the bitter end.
He was close to Appomattox when they signed the treaty ending the Civil War. And according to the family record, all he had was his musket and his powder horn, and he walked all the way back here to his home on the river. It took him 2.5 months, and his family had considered him as up for dead because he didn't come home right after when the war ended. They didn't know he was walking all the way from Appomattox. Anyway, I want to mention one other thing. Before the war, you know, so there was 1860 to 63 or 64 when he actually enlisted. So the war had already been going for some time. I think the war started in 61, something like that. But anyway, he must have known that he was going to get drafted or mustered in, or he was going to join, but it looks like he took enough time to clear some land, plant some crops, and get some things going, and, you know, not just leave his family to do all the work that needed to be done, but I'm guessing that he had a couple of years to get things rolling, because they lived off of the land. I don't think they had a lot of money. You know, they didn't go to the store and buy a McDonald's burger, you know, for dinner. They ate what they grew. And so I'm guessing that he came with seeds, and he came and plowed and cleared land, because this land is very heavily forested, and you can't just grow a garden under all these pine trees. So
It'd be tough to take this on with tractors and stuff today to
much
clear
less
this. I
of
mean,
a-
the timber on it, it's unbelievable.
a handsaw and a horse and a chain.
Yeah. I mean, it's we can't comprehend it. I mean, we spent an hour of our day today at Walmart just so that we could sit out here and well, you had beans. I don't know.
I ate a can of pork and beans and some crackers and milk tonight for dinner.
This is not gourmet.
They weren't even heated up. They were cold, but that was okay. It was good. So, so James leaves for the military, and you can just imagine Sarah is home alone with 5 children to do everything that needed to be done. Her oldest would have been 5 or 6. Her oldest
Goodness.
child. So
She's 5 children out
5
here
children,
in the woods. And
6 and under.
and he got some crops in the ground and hope for the best, I guess. Goodness. You found the pecan tree down there, and you said the nuts were so tough you had to take a rock to them to.
I couldn't take 2 pecans in my hand and crack them. They were too hard, a hard shell on them. But they've been laying on the ground since last fall. So I don't know if that's a tree that they planted. But it was a very large pecan tree, and hundreds of pecans on the ground. I thought it was interesting that the squirrels hadn't taken them, and you would think the squirrels would have hidden all those up for the winter. But I'm sure it was there for them to enjoy. We also know from family stories and that they fished a lot, so they ate a lot of fish. There's a place, they say, on the river there where James had fish traps. Must have been a good fishing hole, and I'm sure that fish was a regular part of their diet.
Yeah, we talked. Charles last night said that was a huge thing down here, for not only it had to have been for the Lindsey family, but for the Indians who lived here before. That was what was that name of that fish that's out here in the Cahaba? The blue.
It was red. Red.
He had one mounted. Well, there went one light.
I thought that was the most expensive one.
Yeah, that's what's very disappointing. I guess I better do something about it. And I'm about ready for my sweater now too.
Oh yeah.
If you want to redo your jacket, let me check those cameras.
I'm going to build up the fire too.
Yeah. Well, we're an hour and 40 minutes into this, and that's who knows. My batteries gave out at the James Monroe Lindsey home site on the Cahaba River there in central Alabama, and I don't even know what the rest of these slides I've got here. Let me cut back to that, and we are an hour and 40, almost right at an hour and 45 minutes into this program. So I'll try to get through this pretty quick. Let me see. I think that I'd mentioned the black Lindsey book a little earlier, but that 1963 black book compiled by Von Hamberlin Rowley in Lindsey Volume 2, Fayrene Bonebreak, Bill Grubbs worked on that. The Lindsey Master File on Ancestry.com, Bill Grubbs. Certainly all of you on this Facebook group who have access to that through Bill. And there was a great book published in the 2013 reunion for a cemetery tour. There's those 2 books right there that were actually published. These are some of my earliest family pictures there. This is the Hamberlin family, the entire Lindsey. All of our Lindsey line owe such a debt to this group of people right here who have been so dedicated in keeping these records and doing the research. I don't know how detailed I get into this, but we're going to have more, and I've got hours and hours and hours of recorded interviews and tapes, and I'm working to preserve photographs. This stuff is it's a lot of work. Time and effort, and it gets to be expensive. I'll tell you one little story. This is to take a break from our regularly scheduled program for a second here, but I've been I moved my office after I've been in an office in downtown Longview, Texas for 20 years, and I moved out recently, and I had I'd put all my magazines, and I've been scanning them and just basically trying to clean up my stuff so that I don't have just a mountain of things left for my kids to deal with someday down the road. But this is interesting to me. This cover of this magazine, Mac User, it's a buyer's guide to storage cost that was just doesn't seem that long ago to me, but July 1972, and I got this price of a hard drive here. The rest of this stuff is pretty much archaic, but hard drives are still with us. And I calculated the amount of storage attached to my laptop computer today if I had to pay the price of the storage in 1992. And so attached to my laptop computer, the storage there would cost over $1 billion in 1972. So when you start dealing with video and things, these data rates, they are enormous. That's the reason you have to have these high-speed video or high-speed internet connections to even watch this video. Anyway, let me jump back into our show here. There's the Hamberlin family. And of course, Vaughn, her name is on the book. She certainly had a lot of cooperation and help doing this, but she was the prime mover there with all her little kids. And I've had interviews, videotaped interviews with several of them and their memories of this whole process and period. It's pretty fascinating. But, you know, none of us have any illusion that our people are anything but, you know, a very humble origins. And I know that Vaughn, the story is told in some of those interviews with her children about them, her saving money from their school lunches, and to just trying to save money for a stamp back in the Great Depression. So these records, these family records we have, not many families have this kind of thing, and they are a tremendous treasure. It's worth the investment of your time to learn about the Lindsey family. Let me see. Looks like I've got another video in here. I hope this, we'll see how long this goes.
Maureen was talking about Mother she has a letter that Mama wrote to Aunt Blanche, and she and Aunt Blanche corresponded a lot. Even the occasional long-distance phone call when they thought it was really important, but usually by letter. And Aunt Blanche was down here a lot at various times, and they occasionally made the trip together to go looking for genealogy research. But they usually split the tasks up, and Blanche would go one way and Mama would go another, and get what they needed and correspond with one another about it. But she had written Aunt Blanche a letter telling her what she had done that week, and she said she had written over 150 letters. I think Fabian said it was 157 letters that week, and she's still trying to get caught up. So it can give you an idea of the amount of correspondence she did. She corresponded with people in Britain and Ireland. She corresponded with people here in the United States and all 50 states as far as I know. A great many people. She got a lot of letters inquiring about what she knew about this family or that family. She sent a lot of letters inquiring about whether or not, you know, I understand you related to this person, or they related to, and they'd correspond on it. It's something you could do in a matter of seconds on the internet now. Email and all of the different genealogy pages. But paper and postage weren't terribly expensive. I remember 3-cent stamps, and that was first-class postage. Carried anywhere in the United States. When she had to correspond overseas and actually get records, a lot of those places required a fee. And she'd buy that universal money order thing that the post office used to offer. They don't offer it anymore. You can't do it anymore. Especially to Britain. When she had to get records out of Britain, she'd go there for it. And she didn't have enough language or help to get anything out of Germany or France. And they felt like that some of the people had come originally from there. The Lindsey name goes back quite a way. It has a really ancient history. But as far as whether or not, how we're connected, we are connected to it, we're bound to be, but where we're connected, we don't know yet.
All right. Again, I can't hear these. It's been a good while since, it's been several years since I recorded the interviews and over a year since I've put together this. And like I say, this was done ad hoc. I thought I was going to have this all streamed and done, and I was going to be mowing lawns today right after lunch. And here it is, after 10 o'clock on Saturday evening. Let me see what else I got here. Looks like I've got another. I'll just go through this. I mean, anybody, you don't have to watch. You're inflicting on yourself.
Oh, it's just so many trips through the years to different places. And everywhere we went, she would either pick up a brick or a rock or something attached to the properties that were almost gone, and dig up flowers or bulbs that had still survived from the flower beds they had planted, and bring them home and transplant them to here to bring a memory home. Bring home part of the history that was left there, and plant it in her yard and keep it. And now some of us continue to do that. Apparently I'm not the only one that does it. Bill does it. But I know Donna has some too. So it's something we learned from her, and we just kept doing it. As far as the Lindsey book, talked about the genealogy, the typing. The only actual thing I remember is going up to the printer in Tyler. I don't remember exactly where it was, but I know it was downtown where there were red brick streets still around the building. And we went in. It wasn't just me, there were several of us there. And they had long tables, and there were stacks of pages around the table, and we were around the table, hand collating the books, so that we saved money on the printing. I was, 10 or 11? And we were walking around that table collating books all day.
And it was hot, like the schoolhouse.
It was hot. I remember that Ray Hardman gave her the money to do it. Loaned her the money to do it. I mean, when they sold the books, they got the money back, but it was Ray Hardman that gave her the money to make the process happen.
And he let that loan carry on for a number of years. They had the loan. It took a while to get it done.
It was a long process, but he believed in it and gave her the money. It was Mother's life. It wasn't a project. It was her life. It was her love, besides her children and family. But she knew these people. It wasn't just, I mean, when they talk about our ancestors, I remember names and I hear things and I know they're back there. But once you get past Granny and Pawpaw and their families, I mean, it's history to me. It's not life. And to Mother, these people were still life. And when she went out and did genealogy, she would find something, and it wasn't, well, I don't know where this one belongs, but there was a sense that it belonged. She had an entire file cabinet of just things, information and data and information on families that she didn't know were tied in, but she felt in her heart they were. And she would keep this information just in case she could tie it in later. She'd still have it to put it into it. So we had this separate file cabinet that was information that might be connected someday, but she felt strongly that it should be. But it was just something that was always in her mind. It's like with your children, even when they're grown and raised, they're still in your mind. They're always there. Oh, somebody would love this, or somebody needs this. It was always a part of her. Always. So there wasn't really a hobby to it. It was a way of life. And I guess that's why it wasn't outstanding to me. It was just always there. I didn't think anything about having the genealogy around my house all the time and talking about it. It was just always there. She went over, above, and beyond. Even when she was sick and in pain, she would go out and do.
So these interviews were recorded in Fairine's living room, that one with Jan. Let me see what we got here.
Vaughn, as I remember her, was such a sweet person. She was never cross with us. And she tried to make us behave, and she tried to teach us. I know as we got older, and
Oh, sorry, guys.
Vaughn, as I remember her,
I was trying to get that menu bar off
was such
there.
a sweet person. She was never cross with us, and she tried to make us behave, and she tried to teach us. I know as we got older, and they would come, we're living in Tyler, and they would come over here to church and spend the afternoon at Mother's, and we'd all gather there around the table. And as I said, Brother Shirley had taught them to do genealogy work, and she had been working on it really, really hard. And our afternoons on Sunday afternoon were spent around the table with her telling us the things that she had learned about the family that week. And of course we were all excited about it, and Vaughn worked so hard, and she didn't have the money to spend to buy or to send off for things so much, but she was so interested in the family and worked so hard on it that she had, I would say, several visions and dreams where the family came to her and talked to her and told her things. It was really miraculous, but it was because she worked so hard on the family and tried and prayed so much about it that she was able to gather as much genealogy as she did about the family. So we have these books and these stories and all these things because of her efforts in searching for the family. Vaughn was always a teacher in Sunday school and wherever, and seminary teacher. Sometimes she would drive cars to have some income, and she would drive all night to be sure she got home next morning to teach her seminary class. And they really enjoyed Vaughn's lessons. She made them come alive to her.
She read a lot of history, studied a lot of history, because she said that had a lot to do with gathering genealogy also. It helps you to know more about it, know more how to collect it.
You know, it's hard to be on camera and but Fayreen and Joy are such treasures, and they are. I just miss them. I'm not able to hear the audio, as I've remarked before. I don't know what they just talked about, but wow. The Lindsey reunion, it will never be quite the same or fun in the same way without them, but maybe we've got some great memories in the future. All right. Just wanted to get into Milam County a little bit, and I think that's most of the video, and we can go through these things pretty quick. Port Sullivan was the destination of the first Lindseys that came in from Alabama after the Civil War, and at that time, if you recall, the railroad hadn't come to Texas. And right there at the very beginning, when the first Lindseys arrived, meanwhile, William Jasper and Martha Emma Maddie, we call her, Lindsey, they had gone out west, and so by the time they got back, the railroad was coming into Texas. But the first place was Port Sullivan's truly a ghost town where the first Lindseys lived, because it was getting into Texas had to be done by boat or overland. There was no railroad. There's very little left at Port Sullivan today. I mean, that's it. A monument, and somebody had stolen the medallion off of that. But there was once a college there, and now it's just the rich agricultural area of the Brazos River Valley. This is very close to Texas A&M University. Any of you who've ever moved around that country know how much... And the cemetery in Port Sullivan, it's a ghost town, and there's very little population there, so there's no descendants of any of these people buried there really in the county left to maintain the cemetery. So a great deal of the cemetery is in very bad shape. This is a little bit difficult area to find. I'm not certain. Let me. I'm having some technical difficulty here. Yeah, I think my recording stopped. But that's my mother. These are first cousins. Connie Denton's daughter on the left, and Myrtle Hamberlin's daughter, Joy, on the right. And of course, Joy is Bill Grubbs' mother, and probably obviously that stone for Lindsey's, and the head of that stone there, William Lemon. Excuse me, I've got lemons in the family on my mind too. William Lindsey. That's James Monroe's father. So there were other Lindseys there, and the Black Lindsey book details some of their stories there in Milam County. just a close-up of the stone. William Lindsey, the father of James Monroe Lindsey, is buried at Port Sullivan Cemetery. Descendants of James Monroe Lindsey were not the first in the family to move to Texas. They followed their aunts, uncles, and cousins from Alabama. Descendants of these Lindsey relatives still live in Central Texas. There's some tragic stories there. I mentioned earlier in this program that Sarah Ann Little died in Milam County, and this is the Little River Baptist Church Cemetery where she's buried. That's Bill Monroe standing. That's Sarah's marker to the right, and James Monroe Lindsey's marker to the left. They transported his body, I mentioned before, had been transported back to his daughter Roxy for burial next to their mother. There's close-ups of those markers, the best pictures I could make of them. Bill and I spent a day. It's a hard day to do it in one day because you're closer to Austin and Waco than you are to far closer. You're on the west side of the Brazos at this point, and so we went. The family. Our line of Lindseys lived in several places, and there were baptisms of children in creeks. And I did a trip down there with Joy one time and saw some of this. This is a sad story here because Fayreen was alive when I did this, and this museum is gone. I guess maybe this is silent if I recall. I believe this is after Fayreen passed, and we were looking at the old Kelsey schoolhouse dispersal sale pending. And yeah, I can see computers there on the desk. We set up computers and scanners, and we scanned every document in that building before the dispersal sale occurred. For anybody who, it's one of our relatives who owns the building still, a Chevalier, a descendant of Sarah Chevalier, whose daughter Viola married a Barksdale, and it's Greg Barksdale. Her son Greg Barksdale bought this. It adjoined his other property in Kelsey, and that's he owns the schoolhouse now. Oh, 2014 in Highland, Utah, Ronald J. and Fayreen. I forget whose funeral service that picture on the right was, but I can tell even with that amount of that picture was made at a funeral at Kelsey Cemetery. And on the left, Fayreen, I made that picture at a Lindsey reunion, no doubt, down by the Gilmer swimming pool, if I recall, when I was 15 years old. That was a good while ago now. That would have been 1972, 1973, Fayreen on the left there. Just some of our Lindsey reunions in the past. Memorial service put on by Fayreen and Myrtle Denton at the Kelsey Cemetery, and of course they're both gone now. What was the occasion of this? Ruby Denton, my Aunt Ruby. This was her 80th birthday party in the cultural hall of the Gilmer Church, and I took some pictures. This is the cemetery tour book. I believe the family of Don Carlos Lindsey was in charge of the reunion in 2013, and this book was excellent, excellent, excellent. I love this book. This is more recent. I think this was the first funeral service after the Kelsey Heritage Center was built. In the background, and maybe even before it was dedicated, if I recall. I'll tell you what, I was going to say a few words about the cemetery, because 2 years in a row we've gotten rained out on work day, and anybody it's time for some younger people in the community and Lindsey families. I mean, if you're in your 40s, it's time for you to start stepping up, because I'm moving rapidly toward my mid 60s, and Kevin Ward's younger than me. He's the president of the Cemetery Association right now, but we need people to take, not, and I'm sure it's not just Kelsey, but Enoch as well. Enough said. I might show a little bit on camera, but I did take a few pictures on work day. I mean, the cemetery is beautiful. It's been well cared for. The cemetery in years past, it was actually owned by the church. The church just got to a point where they divested all the real estate. Old church buildings like the Kelsey Schoolhouse and everything. The church does not maintain real estate like this anywhere in the world. And so they executed a quick claim deed. Kevin Ward, who is in this picture on the left there, he knows the details of when all this occurred, but a 401c3 IRS nonprofit charity, it says, it's actually a section C13, there's a special section of the IRS tax code for community cemeteries. That's a long story. I won't get into that now, but hey, anytime you can, and this is a good activity to do with the kids too. But these are work days in the past, and this would have been maybe 4 years ago. And it is so great to have folks from out of town stop by. We love to give tours at the cemetery, the Heritage Center, to meet people out. It's when you're traveling, it's so hard to take time to do something like this. And look at those kids. I'm sure those kids are a lot bigger now, that those folks, the family here, could look at those kids and say, look how little they are. It's been that number of years. But do these things with your family. One of the fundraisers, because I'll just say a few words for the cemetery right now. The endowment funds and the IRS tax code, the way these things are, there's a substantial amount of money tied up from the sale of the cemetery has an endowment. Unfortunately, it was written on the assumption that there would be interest income from the trust to pay for maintenance. And when we have a situation like exists today and interest rates near zero, the funds from the cemetery's trust don't raise enough money to pay for the maintenance of the lawn care and so forth, So if you move through the cemetery and see these family stakes, and that 8 there signifies the month of August, I believe it's a $200 a year contribution, and you get to nominate who you'd like a signed paste. But if you could chip in, of course, $200 is no small amount of money. It's a difficult thing to do for many of us, but everything is much appreciated. I think I've got just to wrap up here. These are there's a great number of Lindsey relatives in Utah. And some of the siblings of William Jasper, and the sisters married into sometimes missionaries. And so, it's a pretty vast, that's Laree Barksdale and Russ Smith right there. She's from Longview, but I'd have to read name tags on some of these. That embarrasses me. I hope everybody watches this, but I guess I'm exposed. I won't be able to call everybody's names. But I know this is our host family, Glenn Tefteller's bunch. So it was at their home, and this reunion was at their home, and here's just some of the just so that we're aware that and these are not. The reunions in Utah maybe have not been as consistent. I had more things that I could have played here, but this thing is getting, let me check my elapsed time at this point. Oh, wow, 2 hours and 10 minutes. I'll tell you what, if the battery of my iPhone dies, we know for sure it's been too long. There's Bill Grubbs, Diane, Nelson Barksdale. I'm just going to get through this. We've been doing. Here we are in Kelsey Cemetery, though. There's Dixie Calvert in the middle, and Fayreen to the left. David, her son, Dixie's son to the right, and Joy Grubbs at left, and Fayreen there. Both the Taylors have passed now. Larry Lindsey is always good about coming to the cemetery on work days, and we appreciate that. These are Jamie, the girl in the middle there, Tom. That's her and her husband to the left, and Bill Grubbs on the right. At the cemetery, they live in Central California, up in the Sierra Nevada, I believe. And here she is that was great that they got to come to the Lindsey reunion in Texas. And I think that was a stop on their way to Nashville. Oh, I just about forgot this. We did do a Lindsey reunion a few years ago in the old church. That's my mother with her back to the camera in the far right. That purple grape, oh no, it's grape colored shirt, and that's Myrtle Denton. And there in Emma Warren at that table, and I'm sure you see others that you know in these pictures. Oh, this is the last slide. You know, if I've got some other things, and I may just look at this folder that I threw together about what to show you guys, but take a minute and I'll come back to this slide, and you might want to grab, if you want to send me an email, and I can send you links to whatever, you know. I'm totally willing to give any image or anything I've ever done to anybody who would like it. The one thing I don't do is I don't go to photo labs and get a bunch of pictures made. I learned that lesson when I was a teenager, when I was got my first good camera when I was 13 years old, and I'm not able to do. But I'll come back to this. I don't take print orders or anything, but I will gladly give you any images that I've got or any of these materials, time permitting, and sometimes time doesn't permit. But it's not a lack of willingness on my part. Let me see. I'll try to come back to that slide if you need a moment to grab a pen or something. Let me see what I've got here. We're wrapping things up right now. I'm going to play just a little bit of, I've got audio recordings of talks. The format of the reunion in Utah has been a little bit different at times, and Bill Grubbs has been very good about chasing down descendants of the various families in Utah, and they had some great materials and presented great talks. And so I can't hear any of these things. I'm playing back a little audio of Bill, maybe. In fact, I shouldn't do that. I can't hear the audio, so I know I had Bill talking and I was talking over him right then. But this thing's gone too long, and we'll just do a speed round to finish this up right quick. And just random pictures, which is, there's Noah and Josephine's. That's Idaho. I showed these earlier. Sarah Lindsey and several, when 1895 rolled around and Idaho was admitted to the reunion, when Idaho became a state in 1875, Bill and Maddie Lindsey were living in a place called Grays Lake, Idaho. And Oh, I'm not even showing y'all the picture I'm talking about. And that's Gray's. Gray's Lake is located near Soda Springs. And so that was a pretty interesting time for them. And I've too long of a story to get into, but Bill Grubbs, Nelson Barksdale, and I, and my wife Belita, we've gone up to Gray's Lake and met the local historian. I've got her autograph books. Her name is Ellen Carney. And I may go see her again. Who knows? But that area that Bill and Maddie Lindsey lived at, this is prior to them living. They happened to be in Gray's Lake at the moment Idaho achieved statehood. The Lindsey family was there. And I forget which day it was, but it was either July the 3rd or July the 5th, 1895, because they wanted to have a big 2-day party with the 4th of July combined, and Idaho being admitted as a state. And Bill and Maddie were in that valley. And today, that valley is remote. It's middle of nowhere. Belita and I went there. I've been there several times. And the first time I went there, we were there all day long and saw a single other vehicle on the road, which was a FedEx truck making a delivery to a ranch. And there's no airplanes overhead or anything. It's just, other than that, silent. But it is on the Oregon Trail, and at the time that Bill and Maddie were there, it was thriving because there had been a gold discovery on Caribou Mountain, which is what that book's about. So I've got a few. Today, Gray's Lake is also a National Wildlife Refuge. I was going to show the websites for both Acaba River National Wildlife Refuge and Gray's Lake Wildlife Refuge, and as luck would have it, now this was before lunch, maybe I'll check back while we're on camera, but the Department of the Interior, or whoever manages those things, they're moving web servers today, so they have a notice on that they're not online. That is the Latter-day Saint Chapel in Gray's Lake today. The little congregation is so pitifully small that Ellen Carney, who's the valley historian who wrote the books, Ellen told us that they have to issue callings to people down the mountain to come up and attend services with them so that they just have enough people there to pass the sacrament or whatever. You can tell that that's a high altitude, a specially tuned high altitude design on that church with that metal roof and the steep pitch so that it sheds snow, because snow loading is a very significant factor at high altitudes. Bill and Maddie, their story in Gray's Lake is told in the Black Lindsey book, and this is as foreign a place as two kids from Alabama could possibly be. I calculated Maddie's age when she was there, and she was very young, in her early 20s, and they'd, no doubt about it, they'd never even seen snow before, and they're up there in these horrific conditions. I've got another video that I'm going to bring out. I've recorded a video there telling some of that story, and if I recorded that last September, if I ever get around to editing it. But the other thing that happened, and this is from Ellen Carney, when Bill Grubbs and Nelson Barksdale and I visited with her, is that happened to be historic, brutal, cold winter that they were there, that killed every single head of livestock in the valley. And I did a calculation. I know how many head of cattle William Jasper had, and he lost. It was a horrific loss. He, tens of thousands of dollars in today's money. It was his entire stake in life. Oops. I've been talking about this, and I got to switch back and forth better. But that's the little LDS chapel I was talking about with the steep metal roof. It's a beautiful building. The first time I was there, you could still see piles of snow around the perimeter of that where the roof had shed it. It was nice weather when we were there, and it had warmed up, and the fields were greened up, but of course, deep snow takes longer to. We don't know where exactly Bill and Maddie lived at Gray's Lake, but it's pretty easy to imagine that it was something like that right there. Not that. Talking to Ellen Carney, we know that they were never deeded. There are 3 different ways that people could get land in the West at that time, and they were, basically, what do you say? But they didn't have proper home or any deed to land or anything. That's the National Wildlife Refuge. Today, it's called Gray's Lake. There's not actually what we would think of as a lake. It's much more like a high-altitude marsh. And in the springtime, I've been there in the springtime, you cannot hear there. You can't see that many birds. But out in those marshes, it's a rookery. And they've got their babies, and it is amazingly loud. I forget why I put this slide in there. Oh, it's just random stuff.
We're going to...
We're going to quit this in a minute. I'm just going down some of Noah. We've got a tremendous amount of letters and things. There's a panoramic picture I made. That is Gray's Lake. That valley, even today, in the winter, can be snowed in 90 days at a time, where they cannot access like hospitals or medical care or grocery stores or anything. That's how brutal those conditions are at this place. And it happened to be, this is, people think of the Oregon Trail and all these great western migration trails and the wagon trains and all as if there was a physical road like we have an interstate highway today. Well, that's not true. The trails are alternate trails everywhere. So early in the season, the snows disappear at lower altitudes sooner, but as the passing wagon trains, the animals forage, they become depleted, and so the trail moves up the hill. So this is on Gray's Lake, where Bill and Maddie lived, is actually on the highest alternate route of the Oregon Trail there, close to the Continental Divide in southeastern Idaho. Let me see. I can work this computer sometimes. There's a fascinating story about this man in Gray's Lake who was from Mississippi, an early black convert to the church when he worked on the Nauvoo Temple. He joined the church. He was in the wagon train with Brigham Young. This Green Flake was his name. And that's probably the reason that we have some families in the church. If you are Snowflake, Arizona, well, Snowflake is high altitude LDS community in Arizona, but it's the Flake family. There's been U.S. senators, and but he was probably a slave. There were other besides our bunch that I've talked about who joined the church in Helena and by missionaries that were harbored by James Monroe Lindsey. There were other settlements there were other groups of converts in the South. Too much to get into tonight. It's fascinating. There's James Monroe. There they are in their buggy. There's John Thomas Lindsey. He is also buried at Kelsey. We're bouncing around a little bit. This is Kingsley Lindsey. There's Josephine, the lady. This woman, the Danish convert, is the reason that the Lindsey family has so many generations been intertwined with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint, because of this lady at the left who was a convert and from Denmark or that area of Europe. And Noah Lindsey, our prisoner of war uncle, married her, and that's their youngest child, Kingsley. He worked for the railroad, and he looked after his mother in her old age. The cemetery.
Hi, folks.
Oh, okay, we don't need to see that. Okay, guys, I was going to read the Lindsey cookbook, but no, this has some great biographies in here. I don't think I'm going to do this because we are way, way, way late. Let's shut this down. There's Noah. What else have I got? There's Bill and Maddie. That must have been about the time they were in Grays Lake. There's William Jasper in his old age in Upshur County, no doubt. Isn't that the coolest picture? It's like Wide Earp or something. Folks, I got more things than we could do at a dozen years of reunions. I'm going to bounce through this folder. No doubt you'll see people you know. And if you don't know them yet, you need to get to know them. Jerome has a fascinating story. John Thomas Lindsey and his family. Guys, if anybody watches this from John Thomas's family, you're out there and you're here close by in East Texas, get with me. Johnson Majors, I believe he was a missionary who married one of the Lindsey girls. The names are on these. I should go a little slower. The Lindsey bunch that moved to Utah even fielded their own basketball team up there. Kind of famous for a time. We've come across some new pictures from thanks to Mr. Penhale. I've got albums that I've scanned at archival quality. I try to do everything I do, I try to do at archival quality, which is not what you're going to ever see on Facebook or in this video. This video, Facebook sets a cap on this, and this is a 720 video. It's not even true high def, what you're seeing today. Joe's Valley. I'm in this little studio where I'm recording this. I work for Satterwhite Log Homes in Longview, and we have logging operations around Joe's Valley. This would be in the Wasatch Mountains. The Lindseys were up there running sheep. I'll tell you that. It says sheep camp right there at Joe's Valley because that's what people do at Joe's Valley. And that would be right up in the Wasatch Mountains above Manti, Utah. These are too small. That's Sylvester Lindsey. Let me tell you, Sylvester has some incredibly colorful stories about Sylvester. And Bill and Maddie's story is just absolutely epic. They tried and failed. There's Bill and Maddie. They tried and failed. The place in Grays Lake that I've spoken of several times tonight. Let me show you this. This is the pamphlet from Grays Lake of the National Wildlife Refuge, which they have a little office there. But Bill and Maddie, in this picture right here, they had an epic story. After they joined the church and were baptized in the Cahaba River in Alabama, they determined to, in that day, they determined to go west for the Saints. Bill Grubbs, and this has to be true, their first destination out west was at a place called Lake Point, Utah, which is, those of you who are familiar with the layout of Utah, it's on Interstate 80 today, and instead of going south like you would from Salt Lake to Provo, you head west around the tip of the mountain range at the edge of the West Valley, and you round that and you're out of sight of Salt Lake, and the northern horizon is completely dominated by the Great Salt Lake, and that's where they tried to get established. We think because the missionary who taught them or baptized them, his family was from there, and he made arrangements for them to get a start. Bill got tick bit there and caught Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Got so ill he couldn't care for his family. He wrote a letter to his Uncle Noah, the one who had been the prisoner of war in Chicago. And Noah was married to Josephine. Bill here was sick and bedridden. He wrote his Uncle Noah in Ammon, Idaho, which is today a suburb of Idaho Falls. And Noah Lindsey came to the rescue of his nephew in a wagon and scooped up all his little family, and they took him back to Ammon where Bill convalesced. And at some point, when that gold strike was going on up at Caribou Mountain, if you look at the geography of the Idaho map, you won't see a relationship, because even today, the road from Ammon to Gray's Lake that they would have traveled, the modern highways are not the way they traveled. The dirt gravel road is still there, called the Bone Road, and I've traveled that several times at this point. All right. I can't stop. There they are, Bill and Maddie Lindsey with all 16 of their babies. I've got these in here more than once, don't I? Hey, that's it, folks. Let's cut back. We need some help at the cemetery. Come help us if you can. I've got 2 samples. We're going to have to recoat some painter type work if any of you can help out with that, but I've got samples to test colors of some new products to work on the Kelsey Heritage Center. Those of you who have never visited the Kelsey Cemetery and never seen the Heritage Center, it is an incredible facility that we are so blessed to have, and it adds to the cemetery, and it makes it an extra special place to visit. I hope those of you who are from out of state will someday have an opportunity to stop by and to visit the cemeteries primarily, not only Kelsey but Enoch as well, because I know that there's been so many marriages with the Lindsey is intermarried, so it really doesn't make any difference. Both of those are LDS cemeteries in the oldest surviving communities of saints in the South. Sometimes I think of the community at Kelsey after everything that happened to the church, and the church really was in a very defensive posture, and the Johnson's army descended. In some ways, to me, it seems like that Noah Lindsey was a part of this, as was James Monroe, was after that pulling in period in the early church where the peak of persecution occurred, sending missionaries to the Lindsey family in central Alabama, the James Monroe Lindsey protection of the elders who proselyted there, and there were others in the area before the war. The other communities like that I mentioned, that Black Man Green Flake, was before the war. But I'm talking about after the war, after the church was in such a precarious, so much pressure on it from outside. They'd been driven to the mountains and the refuge at the top of the Rocky Mountains. That these things, when the church first started, it seemed to me to be the first time that the church started looking outward again, to sending out missionaries after the war, and that was our family. Our family is deeply involved in all that, as were many of the other families. in the Kelsey and Enoch community because it was a collecting point of a lot of different efforts. I just happen to be more familiar with the Lindsey history, but I know that the Hamberlins and the Teftellers and many families. I'm trying to pay attention, and I've had the opportunity to travel a good deal with Satterwhite Homes over recent years, and so going or coming to our offices in North Georgia, I try to take time not just to see people like Ken Penhell, which I've seen Mr. Penhell multiple times, and we converse on the phone quite. I haven't heard from him a while. I've got to call. I may call him tomorrow because I'm a little worried. I hadn't heard from him in a while. We've gotten to be great friends. Anyway. Anybody who has endured this for, I'm going to get 2 hours and 36 minutes. Don't you have anything to do? All right. I'm going to see if I recall even how to turn off the stream. I'm glad I got this done tonight. I hope at least one person spots it before the day is over. Wow. I thought I was going to have this knocked out before lunch today and mow 2 lawns besides and a bunch of other projects I had going. And now as it is, I'm going to have to come in here tomorrow and clean up my Lindsey reunion setup from, you can't see everything that I've set up in this. I can't come to work and find this here Monday morning. And by the way, last thing, this is my Corona hair. This is what happens when you don't. Let me see if I got my close-up camera. This is what happens when you don't get a haircut all year. But I've got a plan, and that plan is to make memories for my grandchildren, and specifically my little 5-year-old granddaughter Ayla and my little 9-year-old granddaughter Lily. My plan is to let them cut Papa's hair and hopefully have Belita watch out for my ears. But I'm going to have some kind of hairdo shortly done by my granddaughters. Maybe that'll be a memory for them someday, and I'm sure I'll never forget it. Anyway, I hope everybody's having a great time. We're disappointed that there was no Lindsey reunion this year, and hopefully, things will be better soon. Now, time to hit the stop button on Facebook.